Most of you may be knowing Mr. Gurumurthy Malingam. Is a whole-time member. He was a whole-time member of the Executive Board, Securities Exchange Board of India, SEBI. He was looking after Market Regulation Department, Derivative Market Regulation Department. He is also a present member of the Board Governors of National Institute of Securities Market India. He recently retired from SEBI. He is at Chennai. He is joining us from Chennai. Prior to the current assignment, Mr. Mahalingam was an executive director in the Reserve Bank of India, looking after market operations, both rupee liquidity and FX operation. In his stint of 34 years with RBI, he has taken varied roles: chief forex dealer, chief investment dealer for forex reserve management, head of debt management. He has also been actively involved in regulation and development of money and bond and foreign exchange derivatives market in India. His prior assignments in RBI include bank examiner as also a member of teaching faculty in RBI's Officer Training College. You cannot get such a man with that kind of experience to be a keynote speaker. Then moving to SEBI, he is now master in regulation also. By qualification, he is a master degree holder in statistics and operations research from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, and MBA in international banking and finance from Birmingham Business School, United Kingdom. So more than this, we consider him as a regulator who is open to trading. So he is a regulator open to trading. He's a very soft person. So there are two kinds of regulators we see in RBI. One very strict and we are scared to talk. And this is a guy, whenever we are in the market, we used to approach. Even today, he keeps the same temperament. At the same time, he follows the rules very strictly and a very market-oriented person. Over to Malingam, sir, to have his keynote session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biju. Good morning to all of you. First of all, I'm very thankful to Almus for inviting me to be a part of this session. I have always enjoyed being a part of Almus conference. I mean, I have been a part of the Almus conferences for the last about 5 to 6 years. And what I have observed as a part of this conference is they get a number of speakers who come out with innovative ideas, who come out with absolutely new ideas which have never been explored in the past. And this has actually paved the way for a lot of brainstorming to take place subsequently. So that's the way I look at the Almus conference, that where it's basically unconstrained, unfettered, and one can come up with ideas which could be discussed, deliberated, and then put into operation, provided there is a regulatory and a policy comfort about these ideas. Thanks, Mr. Biju, for that profuse introduction, which of course I don't deserve, except that, okay, I have been with the two regulators, so I have some glimpse of the regulatory background of both RBI and SEBI. To start off with today, I think the topic is pretty interesting. Basically, we are talking about looking back and then thinking ahead. I think all this arises from the fact that we have all gone through the attack by COVID and the resultant impact on the economy across the world. Of course, India has not been an exception to that. The GDP growth figure of 8.4%, which got released just a few days back, does augur well, certainly for the Indian economy, although we can't be complacent that this is coming on a low base. Last year, the GDP growth was negative and it was coming on a low base. So obviously this 8.4% is not the real 8.4% that we would wish for. But nevertheless, certainly things are looking up as far as India is concerned. Inflation, although on the uptick, is in RBI's perception expected to be transitory. So both inflation and growth are actually gradually settling down as far as RBI's perception is concerned. But nevertheless, I think we cannot afford to overlook the risk factors which are lurking in the background. Now, these risk factors we can keep on enumerating, because newer and newer risk factors emerge on the scene. Number one, we are now seeing a resurgence of COVID in Europe, in some of the advanced countries. nobody has an idea what is going to be the potent of this kind of a coronavirus, which is again sprung up in Europe. The second, of course, is all of us is aware, is Omicron variant, which is creating a scare all over the world. Third, it's specific to India is oil prices. I mean, if you had asked anybody just about a year back or two, whether the oil prices would cross the 60 barrier, I think people would have given a clear no for a categorical answer. Today, the oil price has gone well beyond that, and there are market predictions that it might again touch about 100. Although I'm not sure where it is headed because I'm not a market predictor. All that I can say is, now that the oil prices have reached about 70 levels, India has to keep an eye on these prices because the Indian macros are likely to get impacted by these prices. On the liquidity front and the monetary policy front, the policy rates at 4%, 3.35%, repo and reverse repo have been staying put for quite some time now. There is a huge amount of liquidity in the system, thanks to RBI, which has been generously flooding the system with a huge amount of excess liquidity. Although the reverse repo every day has been of the order of, on an average, it has been of the order of about 4 to 5 lakh crores, Reserve Bank has not budged from its stance of trying to flood the entire system with liquidity. And this is given, I would say, to credit RBI, this is infused confidence in the entire markets that RBI is there to support the market, RBI is there to support growth, RBI is there not all the time, like always inflation comes ahead of growth, but RBI has slightly turned the equation today. RBI is actually looking at growth more than the inflation today. The call rates are hovering very close to the reverse repo rate for very obvious reasons. As I told you, the average excess liquidity has been of the order of close to about 5 lakh crores. The 10-year GSEC, at least for the last about 1.5 years, has been traversing in a very narrow range, 5.75 to 6.5%. It has crossed this range in the last about 1 to 1.5 years. The biggest question which is engaging the market attention now is a rollback of this liquidity possible? Is a rollback of this liquidity going to be easy? Is a rollback of this liquidity, is it going to be accepted by the markets? Is it going to be disruptive for the markets? First of all, even before this question is asked, I think we need to ask the question, is a real rollback of the liquidity warranted at all? While a hardcore economist would say that flooding the system with 5 lakh crores of surplus liquidity is a potent danger as far as inflation is concerned, given the economic background, given the macroeconomic background, I think RBI is trying to err on the side of excess liquidity rather than trying to suck it off. And RBI is not the only central bank here. There are other central banks which are adopting a very cautious stance as far as the liquidity is concerned, Fed not being the exception here. So if that had to be the norm, perhaps I would say that this question becomes redundant. That means whether a rollback of the liquidity is going to be disruptive and all that, because a rollback of the liquidity itself is going to be discussed and debated before actually the policymakers can roll it back. I am looking beyond this question. If something were to happen in the horizon that the Indian inflation goes up, I mean, there are several factors which could actually make the Indian inflation jump. One is the oil price. Oil price passing through the 80 barrier is a clear sign of inflation uptick in the country, which the policymakers will have to be wary of. The other important thing for the Indian policymakers is how far are they on the supply side management of inflation? Are they efficient? Are they good enough? Are the methods which are being followed good enough to bring the inflation down, even if the money supply is kept at a higher level? Now, this is something where actually the government has done admirably well in the last few years. And the expectation is that the government will continue to keep doing well to cap the inflation at a reasonable level, despite the monetary policy actually nudging the inflation higher. Now, monetary policy is trying to nudge the inflation higher for the simple reason that the monetary policy is trying to nudge the growth. So nudging the growth doesn't come alone, it nudges the inflation also higher. But as long as the supply side management is going to be good enough, the inflation will not nudge higher. So that is going to be very, very important as far as the inflation is concerned. The second important factor, which all of us is aware of, is the huge amount of inflow of foreign capital into the country. Now, what if there is a reversal in the flow of foreign capital into the country? Now, this is again a question which is only hypothetical at this stage. I would say, in my reckoning, the foreign capital is not going to reverse in a hurry. For the simple reason, I would say, compared to many other economies of India's size, I mean, India's relative magnitude, Indian growth prospects appear reasonably good. And so naturally, the investors would like to come into India. So given that the liquidity, foreign liquidity tap is not going to dry up that fast, I don't want to examine this question right now. I would like to keep this question in the background, thinking that it's not going to materialize immediately. So this is a kind of a background that I am going to set before I am going to come up with some controversial issues for your thinking. Now, the first thing that I want to examine is, so far, the RBI has done, at least in a very, very unconventional way, as far as the handling of the monetary policy is concerned. Can it go a little far? Can it go a little further? This is my question. So the first question that I'm going to pose to RBI is, should the liquidity windows of RBI be open to entities other than banks? Now, this is a question I'm not sure how the RBI will take it. I'm freely coming up with a question because I don't belong to RBI. So I'm freely posing this question to RBI. But in my view, while RBI has been coming up with sector-specific liquidity windows, which would address NBFC problems, which would address mutual fund problems, I am raising the question, what if the central bank liquidity were to be made available directly to the mutual funds, directly to the NBFCs? Why am I raising this question? The most important reason why I am raising this question is, again, I'm going to get into a very controversial area. If you ask an economist, he would say banks are special. I would like to put the counter question to the economist. Why are banks so special? Are not NBFCs special? Are not mutual funds special these days? Now, these are becoming systemically bigger and bigger entities. In terms of the magnitude of the market turnover, in terms of the market size that they command, these institutions are becoming bigger and bigger. Number two, the interconnectedness within the Indian market is growing with every passing day, which means we can no longer look at the banks and feel comfortable that the banks are fine, so the entire system is fine. If there is a mutual fund which could get destabilized because of certain factors, if there is an NBFC which could get destabilized because of certain factors, it's not going to remain, that destabilization forces are not going to be confined to the NBFC and the mutual fund alone. They will drag a few more entities in the financial sector, with the result that a regulator will have to have a wholesome look at the financial sector. And he is not actually, he cannot be complacent looking at the banks being kept out of this financial sector dislocation or destabilization. So this is a perspective that I come from. And we have had an excellent experience of this when the IL&FS crisis broke out. when the Franklin Templeton crisis broke out and the bond markets went into a liquidity freeze, the question which was uppermost in the lips of all the people at that point of time was, can mutual funds, can NBFCs have access to central bank liquidity? Yes, central bank did accede to this request, but then it came through banks. And all of us are aware, while in some cases it works, in some cases it simply does not work at all. Because it could be simply because of the risk aversion of the banks themselves. Why should the banks function as an intermediary to take the liquidity from the RBI and pass it on to the NBFC or pass it on to the mutual fund? And they should carry the risk of the mutual fund as well as the NBFC. So this many banks are not willing to do. So many banks may not be availing the windows, availing the facility. What worked on the last 2 or 3 occasions was that the mere psychology of RBI announcing a window being open through the mechanism of banks, it gave a huge amount of comfort to the markets that the markets actually rested behind the RBI's comfort. Look, I'm there behind you. I'm going to give you liquidity. My question is, if these windows had been tested really in a very tough manner, I'm not sure whether the windows would have worked. So this is where I'm coming from. Can the RBI now think of extending, going beyond the banks and primary dealers as far as the LAF window is concerned, as far as the repo liquidity is concerned, as far as the variable rate repo liquidity is concerned? Can they bring in these players as far as the market is concerned? Now, this is something which the RBI will have to consider. RBI will certainly give an answer saying that these windows are open only for the scheduled commercial banks. The scheduled commercial banks are supposed to fulfill certain obligations. So those obligations are not expected of the other entities. So they are not entitled to these windows at all. The question that I am posing is, should we confine ourselves to this kind of a narrow perspective? Should we not come out of this perspective and then try to look at the financial sector as a whole from the angle of stability of the financial sector, from the angle of stability of the entire system? Should not the RBI look at even the entities which are beyond the regulation of RBI as a part of the systemic stability mechanism and open the windows to them? I'm not saying open it to all and sundry as far as mutual funds are concerned, as far as NBFCs are concerned. RBI can have its own set of parameters, which will be filtering parameters, and these filtering parameters could be applied when they are going to open these windows to some of these entities. And that will augur well, in my view, as far as the future stability of the financial system is concerned. We are all going through uncharted monetary policy. We are all going through uncharted economic growth paths. So my feeling is sticking to conventional methods here may not be of any avail. We may have to break out of the conventional methods and experiment with new things so that things can work much more effectively. I would like to compliment RBI to say that, I mean, nobody ever thought of open market operations in RBI beyond the central government securities. For the first time, RBI introduced open market operations on the state government securities, completely unconventional. I could still imagine when I was in RBI, the argument used to be, how can I go and buy a West Bengal security or a Tamil Nadu government security? Because people will think that the central bank is favoring that state government. No, certainly not. Today, RBI has come out of that kind of a thinking, which is actually confined to a cocoon, and RBI has gone very boldly in the path of actually buying up the state government securities. If RBI can do it consistently, I am very sure it will bring in much more liquidity in the state government securities market. I would extend this a little further, although it would require the support of the legal enactments. Can RBI go and buy the AAA rated corporate bonds? Can RBI go and buy less than AAA rated corporate bonds, although they are investment grade? Well, I think we need to examine these questions. I don't think we can put these questions on the side burner and leave it aside. Time has come for us to think over these questions. It is not that the impairment of central bank balance sheet is something which is going to be the uppermost in the minds of the people today. Central bank is capable of, it has the talent, it has the skill, it has innovative ideas to manage this credit risk, which is arising out of a mutual fund, which is arising out of a corporate bond, which is arising out of an NBFC, to deal with these people directly. This is my perspective, but I open this absolutely to the House for any further discussion. This is one issue that I wanted to touch on. There is another issue that I am going to come up with, a few aspects of capital account convertibility. Now we are in the midst of a scenario where India is having a copious amount of capital inflows, huge amount of capital inflows. In the midst of all this, if you ask me, where are we as far as the capital convertibility is concerned, right from the time that 1997 Tarapur Committee report broached this topic, we have progress, but I'm not sure we have progressed at the pace that the country requires. There are areas where we have to exercise caution, areas where we can afford to be a little more liberal. Now, if one or two areas I'm going to touch upon, which I have been actually voicing in the meetings that I have been addressing. We have been having this voluntary retention route as far as the foreign portfolio investor is concerned. There is a limit to the voluntary retention rule that you cannot bring investors into the country beyond this corpus, which is allowed by RBI. The first question that I am posing here is, why can't this rule be kept unfettered, unlimited? The question that I am posing is with a perspective that when somebody comes through a voluntary retention route, he is coming with a promise of retaining the capital in the country for at least 3 years. He can retain the capital in the country for a much longer period. He is not going to withdraw the capital in a jiffy. In comparison to that, when a foreign portfolio investor brings some money into the country, into the market or into the normal route, he can take the capital away at any point of time. In the voluntary retention route, there is also already an insulation barrier built around saying that you can't take the capital out within a period of 3 years. Even after 3 years, the investor is entitled to renew it for a further period of 3 years, or he can take the capital out. Clearly, I would congratulate RBI for having brought the voluntary retention rule. People were very skeptical of the voluntary retention rule in its initial years of introduction. I was in fact puzzled and amazed how this route did not work. But then subsequently we did find that there were a good number of takers for this route. Having experienced this, my question to RBI today is, can we not open up this route altogether? What is the downside that we perceive here? I'm going to come to one downside. Aren't we going to be flooded by capital flows? Fine. If the money is going to come into the country, the money is not going to leave in a jiffy. The money is going to remain in the confines of the country for the next 3 years. And when it is going to leave, we already know it's not going to be by surprise at all. Can we have this kind of a comfort about any other flow? So given this kind of a comfort in the background, my suggestion is that this VRR field has to be left open, has to be opened up. How do we manage the resultant capital flows? I'll come back to it a little later. I would also say, I think the debate about India forming a part of the bond index has been thankfully brought to a positive close today. there was a lot of discussion and debate whether India should form a part of the bond index. I have always been telling that India should form a part of the bond index. I am happy that RBI has brought it up in a limited way. It is engaged in very serious discussions so that India can form a part of the bond index. It's going to bring in more flows into the country. When the equity market is already a part of the MSCI index, I have never understood what really constrained India in forming a part of the bond index. Yes, in the initial years, when we were discussing with the authorities, they were saying that you need to open up the entire bond market. At that time, we did find it very difficult. So certainly at that time, there was a constraint. But today, perhaps forming a part of the global bond index with the kind of constraints that RBI is thinking of is something which is definitely going to be good for the country. In fact, if you ask me, between the FPI flows which come and invest themselves in the rupee bonds and opening up as far as the bond index is concerned, I would say bond index opening up is much, much better. For the simple reason that while people bring in the money, people will take out the money only if there is a strong sense of macroeconomic instability in the country. Otherwise, they would like all the passive investors would continue to remain and the money will not actually go out of the country. There is another thing which again, I did advocate 2 years back in the Almas conference itself, which I will make a passing reference in just about a minute. I think it is time for India to take note of the fact that Indian government should test the waters as far as the sovereign bond market is concerned. There is no need to be scared of this market. We need to get into this market, test these waters for several reasons. One of the most important reasons today, the international interest rates are still benign. We are going to be able to borrow at a much cheaper rate. Hey, wait. What about the hedge costs? That's what the guys would stop me. I would say India doesn't need to hedge at all. Why? Go by the anecdotal evidence starting from 1993, and rupee has depreciated by average of 3.1%. So at this cost, I'm sure that still the Indian government would be there to borrow at a cheaper rate when you get into the sovereign bond market. Now, I'm not saying that plunge headlong. Have a prudential limit here. What was advocated in the budget 2 years before was India would borrow about 10% of the total borrowings in the sovereign bond market. In my view, which I said in the Almas conference 2 years back, which I continue to repeat, it's a very sound prudential limit and India should experiment with it. Quickly, a few things that I wanted to say about the LRS and opening up the capital account as far as the residents are concerned. While I may sound very positive as far as opening up the inflows is concerned, I am not so sanguine about opening about the outflows is concerned. I think we have to have a calibrated mechanism. LRS was an avenue which was open for the residents to take out money. In the recent past, if you see, LRS has touched almost about $2 billion a month. Is it a point of concern? No, I won't really call this as a point of concern. Certainly, it's a kind of a healthy money which is going out in search of better yields, in search of varieties of yields, in search of diversification, etc. But let me put another question here. If this LRS were to touch $5 billion a month, what would happen? I'm very sure the policymakers would sit up, would take note, would like to revisit this issue. $5 billion a month accounts for $60 billion a year. Can we really take it? This is a question that's going to come up. Now, I have not analyzed the pros and cons of these questions. Again, I am raising a question. As far as opening up the outflows is concerned, we have to be a little prudent. We have to be a little cautious for the reason that if you take the international investment position today, it is still negative $327 billion for the country. Negative, which means the assets that the non-residents hold in India which is about $1,120 billion, compared to the assets that the Indians hold abroad, which is about 895, there's a gap of $327 billion. This is substantial in my opinion. Besides this, there could be times when the foreign investors would like to go out in droves. Given these kinds of inhibiting factors, I think we need to take a well-deliberated call as far as outflows are concerned. I know there could be strong counterpoints of view here. I would be very happy to hear the strong counterpoints of view. I may sound very contrarian for the reason that I'm advocating open gates as far as inflows are concerned and constrained gates as far as outflows are concerned. But I'm still I'm still a believer in the policy that given the kind of external debt situation, given the kind of fact that the foreign exchange reserves are borrowed reserves, we need to be very careful about managing the outflows as far as the country is concerned. These are two major areas that I wanted to touch up. I didn't want to get into the equity markets because we don't have too much of time. Equity markets and mutual funds, I had kept it on the Swan side pages. I was thinking that I will talk a little about the equity markets, the kind of overvaluation it is going through, what should the investors do and all, but then I'll keep it aside for the time being. Thank you very much for a very patient listening. I'm open to questions now.
Sir. So we have time for Q&A. And before I put across my few points, because he talked about a lot of points which are quite relevant for the Forex market in particular, where we all are exposed to. But anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand. We have a mic, it will get delivered. So before I go, anyone else has a point? Malingam sir, we'll take a questions.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, Malingam sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Please introduce yourself and put the questions.
Yeah, my name is Mohan. I'm from LSEG and I look after equity primary markets in India.
No, can you just lower the mask when you're speaking because the voice gets a little muffled. I'm sorry, I'm exposing you to COVID.
No, apologies for that. One forgets to take masks down sometimes when it's most appropriate to do so. Anyway, my question, sir, is what are your views on the forthcoming overseas equity listings policy that the government is going through now? Only the tax considerations are left. But you know, in the context of capital inflows and outflows, what are your views on this policy? Thank you.
No, I couldn't hear the question.
Can you just repeat the question? Yeah.
So the question was on you know, the forthcoming direct overseas equity listings and vice versa policy that the government of India is putting through.
Well, now again, I'm no longer a part of SEBI, so I can freely give my own views. As far as the overseas direct listing is concerned, there was one school of thought which felt that aren't we actually selling off our family silver by allowing some of the good companies to go and list abroad directly rather than asking to list in India? So the first thing that we need to do is to make the environment conducive in India so that actually these companies can find it automatically attractive to list in India. But the question that engaged the minds of SEBI is that if we are going to allow them to list in India, do we need to bring down the entry barriers of these listed companies? Should we actually sacrifice the interests of the investors for the sake of actually bringing these companies into the Indian market? Should we not actually ensure that the entry barriers remain intact? So if the entry barriers are going to remain intact, obviously the foreign entry seems to be a little more attractive. So the question in my mind is, perhaps time has come for us to actually lower these entry barriers, leaving the thing to the investor with the risk factors clearly disclosed in any of the prospectuses, any of the information, any of the transparency reports that are going to be put out. Now, how long? I'm not sure that we can carry the interest of the investors, perceiving as if the investors are all naive and they don't understand anything at all. I think time has come for us to believe that the investor he is going to make up his own mind on the basis of the risk perception that he has. So from that perspective, I think if we can lower the entry barriers and bring it on par with some other markets abroad, perhaps listing in India is going to have its own advantage. But despite that, if somebody would like to go overseas and list, I don't think we can come in the way at all, because after all, it is his preference for listing abroad. That's absolutely fine. So my basic contention here is, I think we should be on as far as transparency and disclosure is concerned, and leave the decision of investment to the investor.
I'll be the one who will be giving you the countdown, stating 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Don't worry.
Faris? Okay, so so that is a special comments from the console.
Sorry, I
Malingam
don't-
sir, I have one question, and I couldn't resist asking you that. You talked about capital account convertibility. You also said inclusion in the bond indices. What do you see, one, as a timeline as far as the inclusion in the bond indices is concerned, and what could you see the impact as far as the influx of dollars is concerned and the impact on rupee?
Yeah, timeline, I will not be able to say anything because I'm not a part of RBI. I don't know what is transpiring within RBI and government, but I would guess the timeline would be approximately about 6 months to 1 year for this policy to come into being. This is just a guesstimate. This is not backed by any other assessment at all. So let me take an anticipatory bail right at the beginning. As far as managing this foreign inflows are concerned, I am very sure that once India becomes a part of the index, a good amount of inflows are expected. Again, I don't have a take on the amount of money which is going to come in. But then the question is, if a copious amount of forex inflows are going to come in, is Reserve Bank well equipped to manage that? I am absolutely sure that Reserve Bank is very well equipped to manage that, which means basically Reserve Bank will opt for actually building up the coffer of foreign exchange reserves rather than allowing the rupee to appreciate endlessly. So to that extent, because endless appreciation of the rupee is going to endanger our exports is taking off now. It's actually shown very positive signs. So that cannot be derailed by an appreciating rupee. And on the RER side, we are fairly valued in comparison to just about 4 years, 5 years back, that we are at 103, 102 levels. And given these kinds of things, they can't allow, at least from the policymakers' perspective, the overriding point should be that we cannot allow the rupee to appreciate. But if the resultant stance is that you go and buy up the dollars in the market on a day-to-day basis, is it good for the country? My categorical answer to this is, yes, it is good for the country. We need to build up the forex reserves. Now, given the international investment reserve position, as I told you, I don't think building the foreign exchange reserves is going to be counterproductive as far as the country is concerned. What about the cost of reserves? Aren't we having a negative carry on these reserves? Yes, we do have a negative carry. But this negative carry is a cost that we pay for the external sector stability of the country. So we need to do that. I am just not averse to buying up the dollars and trying to keep the rupee pegged rather than trying to allow the rupee to appreciate.
Yesterday, we had a very, very healthy debate on the topic of RBI interventions on the forex market, where we had Assistant Professor Rajeshwari Sen Gupta, and we had half an hour session. I'm sure your views on the subject coming from the regulator would have really, really benefited, and probably we'll keep that debate some other time, but would love to have your views on the subject as well. That was on RBI intervention and maintaining the rupee stability. We don't probably have time for one more questions. We are ready, I think, for the next session. But Malingam sir, I can just share my sentiments, emotions. You have been one of the key contributor to building up the Almas Rupee Money Conference. And I think we have been immensely benefited, and likewise for everyone who has been participating for the last 7 years. We are into 8th years. So I really, really thank you from the entire Almas team for your contributions. And I think for us, it's like hearing you once in a year and setting the roadmap for the entire next maybe 5 years. Last year, I remember you talked about the forex and the bond market, and those points are still valid. And that goes a long way in building up our own vision for the future. So thank you so much, sir, for being who you
Thank
are
you.
for all of us here at Almas.
Thank you very much, Maulik.